This is a desk study presentation on family prostitution in India by Kaylin Bigby. This presentation has been completed for my Women, Environment, and Gender class, taken at the University of South Florida for Professor Dr. Zoe Fine. So you might ask yourself, what exactly is family prostitution anyways? And how does it differ from other forms of prostitution that we're already more familiar with? Specifically, family prostitution, also known as generational prostitution, is when family members or family units partake in, encourage, permit, benefit from, and/or enable the sex work of other family members. This is done in many ways depending on the culture, religion, and surrounding community of the family, but it is the family element itself that distinguishes this unique system from other forms of prostitution. Why does family prostitution exist in India? I hypothesize that family prostitution in India exists due to complicated religious, cultural, and familial structures that have evolved throughout history into its present-day form to act as a solution to socio-economic challenges and as an acceptable yet toxic outlet to masculine urges. But wait a minute, let's back that hypothesis up. And that's not what I mean. What I mean is, what do the experts in the literature say? In my research, I tried to find experts in literature with first-hand experience and knowledge of the unique culture in India and the influences that lead to the family prostitution there. Family prostitution is a broad term and it takes many forms in India. Listed below are some of the many forms of family prostitution. In order to understand how family prostitution has evolved into its present-day form, one must take India's unique history, culture, and societal views on women and sex into consideration. One form of family prostitution is religious prostitution, also known as temple prostitution, sacred prostitution, cult prostitution, or prostitutes of God. Whether socially acceptable or not, many countries have different forms of religious prostitution, including our own. A discussion on family prostitution in India would be left incomplete without mention of the Devadasi system and how its unique historical evolution has led to a religious form of family prostitution practice in India. The Devadasi system can be traced back to southern India as early as the 6th century AD. Devadasi is a Sanskrit word that literally translates to mean female servant of God. The Devadasi are female artisans whose lives are dedicated to temple servitude. They are ceremoniously married off to the god of the specific temple they serve. Considered the wives of a literal god, Devadasi women are treated with great honor and respect. Seeing as they are already married to a god, they are unable to marry a mortal man, and thus they are referred to as Nitya Sanangali, which means someone who can never be a widow. Even though they cannot marry, they were free to have romantic relationships, and their children were seen as legitimate within the eyes of the community. Many Devadasi became consorts of royalty, high-caste men, landowners, and noblemen. As I said, the Devadasi were artisans. They were trained in all forms of performing arts, as well as ritual and ceremonial practices. Girls from all caste levels were dedicated to religious life within the Devadasi system. Upper caste, physically beautiful, or naturally talented girls were trained to dance, sing, play musical instruments, recite poetry, bestow blessings, perform religious rituals, participate in ceremonies, and appear as honored guests in important celebrations, while lower caste girls and those less endowed with physical beauty or talent serviced the temples. by dressing and fanning the statued idols, and by cleaning, decorating, and maintaining the temple grounds. As keepers of the arts and rituals and as highly sought-after entertainers, the Devadasi were held in high esteem by their surrounding communities. Many were paid in gold, precious jewels, and land for their services. Their wealth, coupled with their ability to pass down that wealth to their female successors, being able to date as they saw fit, and the fact that they were unwed and thus free to direct and govern their lives separate from a husband, made the Devadasi women uniquely independent. However, the modern-day Devadasi system resembles little of the traditional system of the past. When colonial rule came to India, it was the beginning of the end to the Devadasi system. Their ritual public dancing was seen as lustful and obscene, and thus offended the sensibilities of Christian Western culture. The idea that a woman could freely own her own sex life, not marry, own land, and abandon the norms of the standard father-son ways of inheritance by passing on their life's accumulation of land and wealth to their daughters as well, let's just say it was a little too much. As British rule spread, so did their Christian views, their patriarchal customs, and Western-style education. As the Indian education system took on a more westernized approach, the newly Western educated generations of India became the spearheads in debate, reason, and reform. No longer were the Devadasi held in great esteem. Instead, they were seen as lowly prostitutes and or victims. No longer paid for their knowledge of and ability to perform rituals and ceremonies, and stripped of their status and identity within the community, the Devadasi women were forced to rely more and more on their relationships with wealthy and powerful men to pay their way. Over time, they succumbed to the label they were ignorantly branded with, thus becoming little more than lowly prostitutes and child sex slaves. Eventually, the Devadasi system was made illegal. Passed right after the end of British rule, the Madras Devadasi Prevention and Dedication Bill of 1938 and the Devadasi Abolition Bill of 1947 gave Devadasis the legal right to marry, but it also made it illegal to dedicate girls to Hindu temples. Today's Devadasi system is corrupt and rampant, with underage girls and vulnerable women from the lowest castes, who are frequently taken advantage of and used by men of power and means. Prepubescent girls are sold to the temples by their parents in return for monthly compensation to the family. The girls are then dedicated in a tali-tying dedication ceremony, in which she is symbolically married off to the temple's deity. Upon the onset of puberty or her first menstruation, a puberty ceremony is performed to announce to the community that she has come of age. Her marriage can now begin, and her virginity is auctioned off to the highest bidder. Another form of family prostitution in India is prostitution as a family business. Some communities, often referred to as red light areas, have economies completely dependent upon sex work. Families in these communities pass down the family business of prostitution from generation to generation. Male-born children grow up to become pimps for their wives and daughters, while female-born children are trained in the profession of sex work from an early age. In these families, the men make almost no significant contribution to the family economy, while women are entirely responsible for fulfilling the subsistence needs of their family. In the Habala settlement in Fatehpur village, many prostitutes stated that they consider it their destiny that they are in this occupation, and though they have been suffering, they are unable to change it. However, they do not wish their girls to enter into the same occupation. Sex trafficking is yet another common form of family prostitution in India. Daughters are sold by their parents to brothels, pimps, madams, and sex traffickers in the city as a way to address their economic challenges and to compensate for the dowry price that accompanies having a female child. Families in poverty or debt will sell their female children as indentured servants to work off their family's debts, or when they are unable to provide for their children's needs, parents feel like selling their daughters into sex slavery is one of the only few options available to ensure their survival. Finally, we must talk about child brides. India has the highest number of child brides in the world. When families are unable to provide for their children, one option that has taken root in India is to marry their daughters off. Once married, the responsibility to house, feed, and clothe falls to their older, more established husbands. Let's get back to the literature. The literature says that family prostitution has evolved over time from family tradition and religious and cultural practices of the past into its present-day form we see today. Family prostitution exists in part because of cultural attitudes towards women. Family prostitution is in response to socioeconomic hardship. Family prostitution would not exist without a steady flow of paying clients. And also, family prostitution has become an institutional phenomenon. When we quote the literature directly, we get a great sense of Indian society's view of women, sex, and prostitution in general. These systemic cultural views do much to shape the current predicament when it comes to family prostitution. If we take, for example, these quotes listed below, as the physiological sexual tension mounts up, the body demands relief. For the unmated and otherwise sexually unsuccessful male, a visit to a prostitute can at least satisfy his basic physiological needs as a safety valve. And here we see society's view of women and prostitutes as but a means to satisfy sexual urges. Vedic literature serves as a warehouse of information on prostitutes and prostitution. For instance, the Rig Veda mentions both prostitutes and illegitimate children. Vagabond priests and their female companions has been described in the Atharvana Veda as sacred prostitutes. Who can forget the Hindu ritual of love in Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra? Also, trafficking for purposes of sexual exploitation, marriage, bonded labor, domestic servitude, brothel-based prostitution, and sex tourism is widespread. In addition, India has emerged as a major source, transit, and destination country for sex trafficking. All of these quotes better shape our understanding of the culture in India when The study designs include first-hand observations, government and health statistics, interview excerpts, qualitative descriptions, and collection, review, and analysis of data from previous studies. Examples from the literature include to bring our discussion on family prostitution in India full circle, we need to bring forth solutions. Meaningful restructuring of the legal system is desperately needed and currently underway. For example, a new definition has been coined for the word prostitution in the Government of India's Prevention of Immoral Traffic Act, enacted since January 1987, which now means sexual exploitation or abuse of persons for commercial purpose. Much like institutional racism in America, India suffers from institutional prostitution brought on by historically toxic views surrounding women, sex, poverty, and lower castes. Because of low caste and untouchable status, many prostitutes are unable to take part in government or medical aid. Take this quote from the literature, for example. Because of the strong prejudice against them, they cannot take advantage of the government health facilities and have to depend mostly on local quacks who charge them exorbitantly for treatment and medicines. A large proportion of them suffer intermittently from various kinds of STDs. Besides legal and social reform, implementation of the 3 R's have been proven to be successful. The 3 R's include removal, rehabilitation, and reintegration. The majority of trafficked respondents report being forced to live behind closed doors of brothels for several years after being trafficked, while being denied any social contact outside of prostitution activities. They also reported being forced by brothel keepers and pimps to take clients, thereby being devoid of all decision-making powers. This quote directly shows us the importance of removal from this sort of environment, as well as lack of effective empowerment provisions for victims during rehabilitation process may disrupt the reintegration process and incite many victims to retreat to their exploitative situations. This quote shows us that even with removal and rehabilitation, that if there is a lack of effective empowerment for the individuals after they have been removed and rehabilitated, they will often retreat back to the situation they were saved from in the first place. This shows us how important it is to find ways to reintegrate people back into society, which is complicated by the low caste systems